Gestalt, that's the theory of visual unity. So unity, that's what we've talked about, pretty much this entire class, is what brings a design together and makes it work. Unity and harmony are the same thing. And Gestalt, that's what the term is called, the theory of visual unity. Gestalt were those psychologists from Germany in the early 20th century. They got together and came up with these things. So here's an example that we looked at about the whole is more important than the sum of its parts. That's something I often think about when I think about Gestalt. Individually, you have these different elements, but putting them all together into a whole, it makes it work, and the whole is more important. So here's the definition of unity. Unity is the organization of all the elements of a work of art into a harmonious, unified whole. Each element used may have intrinsic characteristics which create interest, but it must function in such a way that the whole is more important than its parts. In which some shapes are in front of and partially hide or obscure others. So y'all did a project on this. This is where just having things overlap one another helps create an illusion of depth. So here's an example of a Japanese print that had overlapping elements. Proximity is achieved when putting elements of a design close together. They look as if they belong together, as a total related pattern or unit. It is a common unifying factor and the simplest way to achieve unity. We talked about this one on the first class. So here's an example of proximity. It's a common unifying factor and the simplest way to achieve unity. The tagline on this is goodbye awkward. A focal point is a point of emphasis in a design. A focal point is a point of emphasis in a design. Continuation is the planned arrangement of various forms so that their edges have line up. Forms feel connected from element to element within a design, usually in a line, edge, or direction from one form to another. Did y'all get continuation yet?
Yep.
Here's an example of continuation. How the angles here lead you up here, and they all lead you back around and keep your interest within the composition. Repetition is a valuable device for achieving visual unity with design elements by simply repeating them. Here's an example of repetition. Formal balance is more structured and equal. It gives the feeling of permanence, strength, and stability. Here's an example of formal balance, which is often seen in architecture because of its feeling of permanence and stability. Bilateral symmetry is formal balance of mirrored elements placed on a vertical axis that equally divides the composition. Here's an example of bilateral symmetry. Informal or asymmetrical balance is more casual, natural, not contrived or static in feeling. The sense of balance is maintained by visual elements of equal visual attraction. So remember, informal balance and asymmetrical balance are the same thing. pattern is the repetition of a visual element in a regular and anticipated sequence. So pattern is the repetition of a visual element in a regular and anticipated sequence. Here's a nice pattern. Proportion is a term used to describe the size relationships between various parts of a composition. So proportion is the term used to describe the size relationships between various parts of a composition, as we see here. Value is the artistic term for light and dark, achieved by various forms of shading. Chiaroscuro is the use of light and dark values to imply depth and volume in a two-dimensional work of art. So it's just a really, really intense, high contrast use of value. That's what chiaroscuro is.
I don't know.
When Hamlet was talking to the skull? Yeah.
Okay.
Alas, poor Yorick, I knew you well.
Reminiscent of Constantine wrote that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So line is the element of art that is most familiar to us. Contour lines are used to follow the edges of forms and describe their outlines. Here's an example of a contour line. It just really describes a form. Horizontal lines suggest rest. Vertical lines suggest potential of activity. Vertical lines suggest the potential of activity. And diagonal lines, misspelled, strongly suggest motion. Diagonal lines strongly suggest motion. So diagonal lines strongly suggest motion. Vertical lines suggest the potential of motion. And horizontal lines imply rest. A psychic line is a mental connection between 2 points or elements. This occurs when a figure is pointing or looking in a certain direction, which causes the eye to follow toward the intended focus. An example of a psychic line. Curvilinear is rounded and curving forms that tend to imply flowing shapes, often associated with Art Nouveau. This is an example. So curvilinear, round and flowing. Rectilinear is a design composed of straight lines. This is De Stijl, Mondrian, the artist. Texture is the surface quality of objects that appeals to the tactile sense. So texture is the surface quality of objects that appeals to the tactile sense. Positive space. Positive space is the dark or black object or visual element in a design. Synonyms, figure or foreground. The positive space, figure, and foreground are all the same. They're all talking about the same thing.
So it has to be the black?
No, that's actually, it doesn't have to be black. That's confusing, maybe, I know. So we were talking about like figure ground reversal. It could be white. It's like the foreground element helps. Figure or foreground. Background is the opposite, or negative space. So negative space is the opposite. This is the space that is void or lacking in line, texture, or tone. The blank white space in a design, void of anything. Synonym, ground, or background. But it is possible, yes, to have the positive space be black and then or white and the negative space to be black. Of course, you can have that. So here, in this case, the bird is the foreground or the positive space or the ground, and the green is the background or the negative space. Confusion is when the relationship between positive and negative shapes is close to equal. The eye has difficulty distinguishing which is in front or behind. Open form is the placement of elements in a composition so that they are cut off by the boundaries of the design. This implies that the picture is a partial view of a larger scene. So open form implies that the picture is a partial view of a larger scene. So here's an open form composition. Partial view of a larger scene. And the opposite is closed form. This is where the placement of objects is entirely within the boundaries of the design, by which an artist keeps the viewer's attention within the picture. Anamorphic. Anamorphic is a term used to describe an image that has been optically distorted. Design is the opposite of chance.
What does that mean?
What's that?
What does that mean?
That design, it's just emphasizing that design's not a random thing.
Okay.
It's
It's thought out.
something thought out, like all these elements that you've learned, they can be applied and to any of your work and make it better.
Cool.